All right. We are live with Kevin B. Turner. Welcome to Gray America. We're going to chat about your book, The Secret Fire of Alchemy, Kriya Yoga, Kundalini, and Shamanism. And of course, your journey and anything you want to talk about. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, this will be a lot of fun. We've talked a little bit about this kind of topic over the years, but it looks like you've had quite the journey and the experience. Up to this book. So, I mean, where do you want to start? Do you want to start like a little bit about your history and stuff, and how you kind
The
of met
book
your guru and stuff many years ago, or
the book details 15 years of my life from 1982 to 1997, but
okay,
it really details a project that started 400 years ago and across 4 or 5 lifetimes.
wow. When did you uh when did you figure that was going to be a part of it?
Well, I didn't know it was slowly revealed in dream states, dream initiations that I could only find analogies in alchemy. I discovered most of the alchemical processes later, but when I was in it, I was just in it. But when I found those correlations to alchemical initiations, it eventually led me to Asia, led me to study Tibetan Buddhism, Dumo, Heat Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, and then eventually Kriya Yoga of Sri Yukteswar of Yogananda, of the famous book Autobiography of a Yogi. So I studied and was initiated in Sri Yukteswar's original ashram in India, where Paramahansa Yogananda was. Uh, and Yeah, and now I teach shamanism. So I Kriya yoga, but it is my personal practice, and it has been a huge part of my life. And essentially, what I discovered was that there is a universal inner alchemy that cuts across traditions. So the whole book is about how there is a Eurasian secret tradition going all the way from the alchemists, the Rosicrucians, all the way east through Egypt, Persia, all the way to India, and then on to China, where it's called Neidan or inner alchemy. So this is not a yoga like hot yoga or something that you do outwardly. This is all completely inward, and it is all about upgrading the psychic circuitry of not only the physical body, but the astral and the causal bodies to be able to contain the voltage and the amperage of merging with deities, merging with the Godhead, merging with cosmic consciousness. So this has been known, I mean, since, well, it's difficult to know, probably pre-Ice Age knowledge. Uh, but it has always been secret, and it's been held for a very long time. And it's very slowly leaking out. I see bits and pieces of things coming out over the past 10 or 15 years, and I'm thinking, aha, it's finally coming out. And Hariharananda told me Sri Yukteswar did not give this out, but this is the scientific age. And that is why 30 years after all this happened, I finally wrote this book.
Wow. I
So
mean, is it
does that mean you don't stretch or nothing when it's inward yoga? Like, is that just like meditating then, or how does that work?
Stretching can help, but stretch all the physical yoga postures are just to open up the nadis so you can handle the voltage of merging with cosmic consciousness, or merging with a deity, merging with an archangel, merging with an angel. So that's also classic shamanism. So in a sense, shamanism underlies all the spiritual traditions. Shamanism probably goes back 100,000 years at least, which would make Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism newborn babies compared to shamanism. So shamanism was the beginning of all this, and the shamans realized, what do I need to do in order to be able to contain the power, the spiritual vitality of merging with these spirits? And so that developed into Hinduism and Taoism in China, Hinduism in India. So it's classic. I mean, Vishnu rides Garuda, so the power animal. Ganesh rides a rat, as power animal. I mean, you can find shamanism underlying all the traditions. Taoism is essentially the legacy of shamanism in China. It's just been codified into kind of a system. So Taoism isn't really even a religion, and neither is shamanism. You don't need to believe anything to practice shamanism, because shamanism is practical, operational methodology for working in spiritual realities. There's no belief systems necessary, because shamans, the definition of a shaman is one who knows through direct experience. So shamans go to the places that the prophets went to, the founders of the great religions went to, directly. They don't need to study books. There's no pope of shamanism. There's no church of shamanism. There's no holy book of shamanism, because shamans are accessing direct revelation by their own experience.
Oh man, I have so many questions already. So let's stick with the coming out of all this information, because it seems to me like, you shouldn't really say, not you personally, but you're initiated into these things for a reason. It's supposed to be secret. Your book is even titled the Secret Fire of Alchemy. Is it sort of been a planned release? Because I know that there's the Templars / Rosicrucians seem to be in the midst of also releasing this secret info. Like, is it time that the world sort of hears this spiritual reality? Like, we've been sort of plundering through materialism for a while. Like, is it all sort of part of the plan, or is it just inevitably going to leak out eventually, and that's what's happening?
Well, from another dimension, it probably is, but I wouldn't be in any position to presume to know that schedule.
Right.
Playing my small role. And so, yes, I was inspired, you could say, by the spirits to release this information. Now, I never thought I would write this book. I thought, this is too personal, this is too private. But the time came. And so here it is.
Along with the rest of the not like that there's a lot, but I mean, along with the other leaks that are coming out about our spiritual reality. So, and then the other thing which I find fascinating, because I was going to ask you about cataclysms, like what those wisdom traditions teach you about, especially from the East, about the cataclysms. And you mentioned the Ice Age. Like, the shamanism goes back to pre-Ice Age. So is that a common thread there as well, that we've been through the fall of man, like through cataclysms, and we've sort of had
Well,
to
Yogananda did mention in his autobiography that there were pre-Ice Age civilizations. So we have the legends of Atlantis and Lemuria, etc. And he said these are not legends, that there were many pre-Ice Age civilizations, that it didn't just start in Sumeria 7,000 years ago. I would say that's probably likely, but again, that's really not of my concern at this point. It's really, bringing out the information as best I can. Now, let me say one thing, though, is I teach shamanism. Kriya Yoga is my personal practice, but I don't teach it myself. So you'd have to go to Don Abrams in New York, or Peter Van Breukelen in Holland, or Swami Pragyanananda in Vienna or India to take initiation. So I don't give the actual Kriya Yoga techniques, but I write more about them than has probably been revealed before. Because I think it's time. And that's what Hariharananda said to me. He told me Sri Yukteswar did not give this out before, but now is the scientific age. That was all 29 years ago. So I had to wait 29 years, but that's a short time in the long view.
short time in the Yuga. So what are some of the things that you're revealing that? I mean, what are some things that people need to know, or should know about our spiritual reality, that would sort of blow their minds, or things that you've even experienced personally that, because I
Sure.
always find this Eastern stuff so fascinating,
Just
especially
curious, read the book.
yeah.
Did you read the book?
No, I didn't.
No, we didn't get it yet. They sent it
No.
to us, but it didn't show up in time.
Oh, it never showed up. Oh, so you have no idea what's in the book.
No,
Well,
usually it's pretty good. Usually they get them to us ahead of time, but I've been waiting for the shipment, and it didn't show up.
you should have let me know. Well, here it is, right here.
Well, we figured it's best to have you on anyways, because I do like to prep and read books and listen to stuff. But I mean, we're so
Oh,
busy now too. So,
I was assuming you knew what I was talking about.
well, I mean, usually I do. Usually Darren comes in cold, but
Oh, okay.
Graham's got a pretty good idea what you're talking about anyway, though, because he's been he's read all the old books, and he's been sort of dipping around it.
I haven't been initiated, but we've read a lot. Like, you know, we've done a lot of work.
No worries, no worries. But now I know you haven't read it, so I can alter my conversation here.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay, so wow, where to begin? There's 47 chapters in the book, which over a 15-year period. I'm not sure where to start, but essentially I'm connecting the alchemical Rosicrucian connection with the Asian traditions from the inside, though. So it's not an academic book. I am an academic. I was a tenured professor north of Tokyo. I've published lots of academic papers. I've written many papers on shamanism as well. This was not really meant to convince academics. This was written from the inside by an initiate. And my initiations in alchemy started at age 21 in 1982. And as far as I can tell, there's very, very, very little information about that. And I'm quite sure you have not read anything like this book before.
Okay.
I've read everything.
Okay, hang on. Let's get into the definition of alchemy then. What you're talking about, spiritual alchemy, like, because when people think of alchemy, there's a whole bunch of different definitions floating around people's minds. You know,
I'm talking purely about spiritual alchemy. Now, there is a relationship between the other alchemies, the medicinal alchemies, the spagyrics, the tinctures, and metallurgy.
The transmutation part, yeah.
Well, the transmutation spiritually is transmuting the actual physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, the causal body, to be able to contain the power of cosmic consciousness. So that's the real key. Now, what is interesting is that metals are very vulnerable to alteration by consciousness. So it is quite common for silverware to bend on the table around me by itself without any intention or without any touch at all. And I would say that is a partial result of alchemical initiations, as well as Kriya Yoga, Tibetan Buddhism. There's 6 chapters on Tibetan Buddhism where I'm in the Himalayas with Tibetan lamas. And I connect also the Dumo practices to alchemy and to Kriya Yoga, as well as to the Taoist alchemy practices.
What about a more practical practice or definition of spiritual alchemy? I mean, we've talked about that a little bit, about transmuting sort of emotions through the centers of your body. You know, maybe your chakras, the way Gurdjieff has his 5 centers, the head, the chest, and there's, you know, you can bring in negative emotions, negative stuff, transmute it into love, that type of thing. Is that part of it?
Not the alchemy that I'm talking about, but it's all related. There's also a later development, kind of a mythopoetic aspect, which really Carl Jung sort of, I would say, projected onto alchemy. I think he did not understand at first that alchemy was actually an internal psychophysiological transformation, that the real primal matter is the physical body. And although he did say that alchemy is the yoga of the West, and by yoga, I don't mean the hot yoga thing that you see on TV. I mean the internal yoga. Yoga means to yoke your consciousness to the Godhead. That is merging. So that takes a tremendous amount of preparation, because otherwise what happens is you burn out. Can you plug a toaster directly into a nuclear power plant? No, it'll just fry, it'll melt, it'll explode, because its power capacity is too low. So this is the goal of all shamans, as well as the saints and sages, is to transform themselves to be able to contain the power. That's why many shamans, saints, and sages, they shake, they vibrate, because it's a little bit like driving a car at top speed. The car starts to shake. But if you can transform the car into a Ferrari, it doesn't shake even when you're going 250, K an hour. So that is the goal. That is how yoga got started. Yoga was all about preparing the body. And it's when all the shamans in old India got together, compared notes and said, well, I do this and I do this. And if I eat this way, if I clean my body in this way, I can contain more power so that I can merge better with the deity or with the Godhead. Now, Carl Jung, I think he was much more onto things than he let on, but he developed this big psychological system, which is valid in its own way, but it is, to me, not the original alchemy. The original alchemy, he talked about the progression of humanity is the incarnation of the deity, or something to that, very close to that. What he, and many people were mystified. What on earth is Jung talking about? I think he lost it. And what he meant is the incarnation of the deity in us. So the whole process, in a sense, is we are embodying higher self. And if you keep going up, higher self is the deity. Higher self is the Godhead. Higher self is cosmic consciousness. So the goal of any spiritual path is going to be ultimately embodying that cosmic consciousness,
which is enlightenment.
But you can also say that, then ethics, compassion, morality is all just natural. It's not something you have to force on people. It's something that we simply know, because there's no difference between you and me. We are in oneness.
Is this change what happens after you die then? Is this a goal for after death or while you're alive?
Well, alchemy is mostly for while alive. However, certainly in shamanism and alchemy and Tibetan Buddhism as well, we can learn to navigate the afterlife before we die. In fact, when Plato was on his deathbed, his students asked, what can we do? What's the best thing for us to do while still alive? And he said, practice dying. And some were probably mystified by that. But when we practice dying, we learn how to navigate the afterlife. So in shamanism, I beat this drum. People can go into the theta brainwave pattern immediately. They can go into the transpersonal realm directly, awake rather than asleep as we usually are. And we can explore the afterlife realms before we leave the physical body. We're all guaranteed at least one full out-of-body experience in this life at the end. Until then, we're having partial out-of-body experiences, also called shamanic journeying. So this is really a phasing of consciousness to elsewhere. If we completely left the body, our breath and heart would stop. We'd be dead. So there's some portion of consciousness is remaining with the physical body, even if it feels like, oh, I'm floating out the window, I'm going down the street. So the beginning of my book is this whole series of out-of-body experiences happening in the night and initiations happening in the night.
Well, can you explain what one of the, like a dreamtime initiation or an out-of-body initiation would feel like or look like?
Well, there are many. Robert Monroe journaled several of them and wrote 3 books. And I worked for the Monroe Institute for more than a dozen years. I was involved in them for 20 years. Flying from Asia to teach in Virginia and flying back. So now I don't do that anymore. I'm too busy teaching shamanism.
Was that like the psychopomp type soul rescue stuff, or?
Yeah, yes. I teach the shamanic way to do it now rather than Robert Monroe's way. But Robert Monroe was kind of a natural shaman, and so he actually didn't have a teacher. He just sort of stumbled onto it. But later he did get what he called inspecs, was intelligent species were teaching him about how to navigate these realms. But he didn't actually go into the afterlife transcendent realms until quite a bit later. I think he was mostly journeying in the middle world, which is kind of a dodgy area. We are in the middle world. This is called the pain world, the confused world. This is where we are. But in the transcendent realms, everybody gets what they need. So no mosquitoes, no taxes. We can call it heavenly realms, Garden of Eden, paradise, what have you. But here in the middle world, we've got all kinds of confusion and problems, mostly run by greed and fear here in the middle world. But it doesn't mean it's all bad. It's mixed.
So even though it's not physical, you're still in this middle plane, in this mid-world plane. So even though you're out of your body, you're still attached to this plane, kind of.
Typically in the beginning, but later we can learn to journey outside of that right away. In fact, I would say that I teach in 2 days how to go places that at Monroe Institute you really have to study for 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
So shamanism is quite a bit faster, and I often joke that shamanism saves time and money, because you can just go directly to where the prophets went for their revelations. from
But
those.
don't you have to be careful with not you, but the people with going too fast into this whole thing? I mean, some of these these teachers from the 1800s were warning people about this. You need to go through initiations first. You don't play around with this kind of stuff. You've got to be very, very careful.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner really, God bless him. I love his material, but he was speaking to the people of his time, you know. And when I mean, we're talking, the 1910s, the 1920s, which was the time that Yogananda actually went to California, was 1920, and people were unable to even sit on the floor at that time. And so he had to move very slowly. And so there's a dry way and a wet way in alchemy. The dry way is the heat of Kundalini fire, which is really just blasting off, setting your hair on fire, shooting power up the Sushumna to evolve the brain immediately into cosmic consciousness. But that's an extremely steep path. And that almost requires living in an ashram or monastery, because you really can't deal with normal reality. But the wet way of alchemy or Kundalini yoga is slow transformation. So Kriya yoga is I would say a wet way. It could stimulate dry way. Sometimes people have that, and I did. I described 3 dry Kundalini activations come, where I was actually physically burned from the inside along one nadi.
Wow.
Go to the doctor, and he said, "Oh, did you touch power lines? Did you get electrocuted?" And I said, "No."
Wow.
Burned from the inside. But see, that's the dry way. You have to be very purified to do the dry way. But to do the dry way of alchemy or Kundalini yoga is very fast. You can make huge progress in a single lifetime. The wet way typically spreads out over several incarnations, which is what is described in my book.
I've heard it called the straight path and the spiral path.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
You mentioned spending 6 chapters. I don't know what that equates to in years, though, but in the Himalayas, what was that like? What was sort of the? I mean, most people can't even really imagine what that looks like. Is it were you up like in the middle of nowhere? What are those like monasteries like you see in the?
Gotta read.
Well, you gotta tease it a little bit. You gotta like give us a little teaser, one of the highlights.
While I was in Thailand, well, first of all, I went through near-death experiences. I was in Japan. I met ghost monks in Japan, and then I ended up in a monastery in Thailand. And then in Thailand, I did a 48-hour fast and intensive meditation. And during that, I had visions of Tibetan deities, which just came out of nowhere. And then later I was in Nepal, and by chance I met this Lama unexpectedly. And just the moment I saw his face, the memory of those visions came. And I said, "Sir Rinpoche, I have to share these visions with you." And he immediately said, "Oh, this is a rare and important vision. You will be my student. You will come here tomorrow and take the Buddhist vows, and you will stay here in the monastery." That is literally what happened. And I had gone there just to say hello and give some offerings to lamas and get their blessing, which is a little scarf. I had no idea that this was going to end up this whole journey of years going back and forth between Taiwan and Nepal. So this is in the Nepalese Himalayas, but it is Tibetan monastery because, of course, in Tibet is crushed by communist China, so that you cannot really be free there or study freely there. There's no religious freedom there. So anyway, these are free Tibetan monasteries outside of China.
Is there, I mean, I'd like to ask a question from the chats. Ian is asking, speaking about Tibet, is there any truth to the stories of Tibetan monks levitating rocks and such from chants and music in your experience, or
Yeah.
even beyond that, like any kind of supernatural experiences that might get people to?
Oh yes, several. Well, one, just there is a chapter in there where I was eating breakfast one morning, and suddenly the whole wall began to vibrate. I mean, physically, this was a concrete wall, and the whole wall is vibrating, and the table I was sitting at was vibrating, and it was a monk chanting on the other side of the wall. And it sounded like a bull elephant that drank several hundred liters of soda and was belching. I mean, it's totally supernatural. I mean, no human being could normally make that kind of sound. And and the wall was physically, I mean, I could see the wall shaking, and my whole body was shaking. And I was thankfully on the other side of a concrete wall, or I might have just, my hair might have caught on fire. I don't know. But then I thought, aha, this is how they moved heavy stones, was through mantra. I did not learn those mantras. They're extremely dangerous. They're very well kept within the tradition, because can you imagine if you could use a mantra and knock a building down? Can you imagine? So your ethics have to be extremely high. Your compassion has to be extremely high. You have to be a very developed, I would say, close to sainthood position before they're going to teach you anything that powerful.
That's fascinating. That's kind of what I was getting at with sort of some of the theosophical.
There's another one. I had to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and meditate in my cell. And Shamar Rinpoche, who's the number 2 in the Karmapa Kagyu sect, was in the room above me. He was my teacher. Well, it was freezing every morning. I mean, I'm in the Himalayas, so at 5 a.m. it's absolutely freezing. And I got up anyway and meditated. But one morning it was especially cold, and I thought, oh, I have a brilliant novel idea. I'm going to just lay in bed and meditate. Well, immediately I just fell asleep. But then I lifted out of my body, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll sit in lotus position out of my body because it's much easier, right? My knees don't hurt in the astral body. But then I looked up, and there was somebody saying, hey, psst. And I looked up, and my Lama was leaning through the ceiling in his astral body. And he said, get back in your body, wake up and start meditating. Wow. So I goes, oh, I'm busted, you know. So I got back in my body. I sat up, and boy, I didn't miss any 5 a.m. meditations anymore. But there was also a doppelganger experience. I was studying with him at Nagi Gompa, which is up on the ridge of the Himalayas overlooking the Kathmandu Valley. He went to Europe for a couple of weeks. I left. And when I came back, he still hadn't returned yet. And I thought, oh my, maybe he's back at Swayambhu Nath, which is called the Monkey Temple in Kathmandu, if you're familiar with Nepal. And I thought, oh, I'd better go back there. And I asked everybody on the mountain, I said, where's Shamarpa? And they said, oh, we haven't seen him. And he should be back in Nepal now, but he hasn't arrived back again. So I got my backpack. I started to go down the mountain. But then I looked up, and then the stairs up to the upper monastery, Shamarpa was there on the stairs, waving at me with this big silly grin on his face, which is very uncharacteristic for him. He was the highest ranking living Lama at that time in that sect, in that school of Tibetan Buddhism. I looked up at him and I waved back, and I started to walk toward him, and he just bolted down these stairs and disappeared into the kitchen behind the monastery. And I thought, what was that? And so I went running into the kitchen, and there's only one door in and one door out. That's it. There's only one door. And I said, where's Shamarpa? He just entered this building. And they were holding ladles and knives. And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. As I was scratching my head, and I thought, well, that was definitely Shamarpa waving at me. But I was delayed just enough so that when I started to go down the mountain, he was coming up from the road, and we met. And he said, why are you going down? I'm going up with the same silly grin. So we call that a doppelganger, or a double goer, or a double body.
Was it a biolocation thing? Like, was he wasn't there astrally, or was?
Well, I saw him physically, but who's to say what a doppelganger is? But people physically see doppelgangers. And actually, in my courses, when I teach shamanism in Bali, my own students see my doppelganger every now and then, whether I'm aware of it or not.
Wow.
Part of multidimensional consciousness.
Yeah.
And we sometimes make this division between like physical reality and spiritual reality, but ultimately there's no division. And there are many, many examples in my book of where spiritual realities and physical realities are bleeding over and very clearly related.
Have you heard of the Tulpa experience or the manifesting, like almost like manifesting a doppelganger type thing, like a
Yes,
spiritual
this
entity?
magically as well. Unfortunately, a lot of sorcerers learn how to do this and they use it for doing unethical things.
Yeah.
Why this is kept rather secret. I don't teach that kind of thing because it could be misused almost immediately.
I mean, that's another issue that is coming up. I mean, even somebody mentioned it in the chats there about there is no such thing as good magic. Like there's this real tendency to label things good and evil and black and white, and especially with kind of a resurgence into Christ and Christianity right now, which is kind of bringing back this negative connotation about witchcraft and anything sort of supernatural. So how would you explain to people that it's just a process? It can be used for good or evil, or that kind of thing. That magic in itself is not good or evil. It's how it's handled as a tool or used as a tool.
Exactly. Well, Jesus plays quite a role in the book, and I would say that Jesus was a great shaman. Jesus was a realized shaman. He was a realized alchemist. He was actually able to bring the solar logos into the physical realm. That's why he was able to do those macro miracles, or as they say in India, the Mahasiddhis, the great powers. And so he's considered very much in the line of Kriya Yoga. Yogananda always said he was in the lineage. So did Sri Yukteswar, and so did
Wow.
Yogananda. And so do I, because I had direct experiences with him that are detailed in the book. This,
So
I
you're
say,
from that lineage, like, so they is that
I,
the same lineage? They say he's from that lineage?
well, they are related. And there is a very interesting thing, and that is that Sri Yukteswar recalculated the yugas, the great year, as you're familiar with the precession. Every 26,000 years, of course, we go through a full precession. And he recalculated the yugas and found that we exited the Kali Yuga in 1899. Now, secretly in Europe, the Rosicrucians were also teaching, highly secret, that the Kali Yuga ended in 1899. This is totally separated. I don't think that they were working on a physical plane together, but from a spiritual realm, I think you had Eastern and Western traditions working together. The beautiful thing about India is that Indian culture accepts miracles. Indian culture accepts magic and spirituality, whereas in Europe, it's, well, quite frankly, it's just primitive. People are scared. And of course, the Vatican instilled a lot of fear. And anything magical, any kind of miracles, and you're immediately killed or put into a psychiatric institution. So this is very unfortunate, but things are changing.
Well, the Enlightenment didn't help either. I mean, that had its own negative impact on.
Yes, I mean, Michael Harner often says that there was basically an agreement during the Renaissance that because the church just could not stop science. I mean, there were too many benefits with the medicine and engineering and clean water and all of these good things. They said, okay, we can't stop science, but at least we can divide it. So they said, okay, you scientists, you do your thing, but leave anything spiritual up to us. And so scientists just started to say, okay, we're not going to deal with the spiritual realm at all. In fact, we're going to say it doesn't exist because ask the church, don't ask us. Well, this divide never ended, and it just went on and became dogmatic to the point to where scientists started to say spirits don't exist, afterlife doesn't exist, soul doesn't exist, spirit doesn't exist, even though many of the world's top scientists believed that it did and had direct experiences that transcended time and space. And in fact, if anybody studies quantum physics, I mean, time and space is something very, very flexible. And so to say that there are no spiritual realities is very unscientific.
Is where do you think the turning point has been recently? Like you mentioned, it's opening up, because that's what I really think the last 10 or 20 years, it's been opening up. I think in the 1800s it was opening up, and then it got shut down in like the early 1900s. World War One, physical sciences and stuff. Einstein, all those excuses to ignore the spiritual reality. But what would you say, like in recently, how long has it been shifting, do you think?
I would say that there were probably sort of two fathers of this new spiritual age, and that would be when Paramahansa Yogananda went to California in 1920, and when Carl Jung in Europe started to bring in Eastern teachings and open up his psychology. I would call Jungian psychology shamanism under another name. So those I would say Yogananda and Carl Jung were kind of the two fathers of the New Age, and this is about 100 years ago. But that's also about the time that Rudolf Steiner left. So Rudolf Steiner also was teaching, but he didn't have as big an audience. And he was probably way ahead of his time. In fact, I would say maybe 100 years ahead of his time. And probably reading Steiner now makes more sense than it did then.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's predicted a few things pretty well on the nail. Do you think that there's any underrated teachers like Gurdjieff type people that are going to get more attention coming up?
Boy, it's hard to say. You know, I'm here in Asia and I don't really have my finger on the pulse of things in the West so much. But it is interesting to see the kind of the old guard that I knew are all checking out. I was privileged to know Ram Dass, and Stan Groff is still alive but very elderly. I knew him as well. Knew him in Prague anyway. We spoke together at the International Transpersonal Conference there, and Timothy Leary's gone, of course. And a whole slew of teachers from that era are kind of leaving now. And I'll be 64 in a few months, and so the sort of new crop of teachers, we're not getting any younger either. So so it's one of the reasons I really had to write this book, and I felt the spirits pressured me. And I felt that I cannot let this story die with me. It's not that there's anything absolutely new in the book, but there are connections that I would say you probably have never read anywhere before.
Is it coming out on audio as well?
There's some discussion. Some people say I have a nice voice and I should do it myself.
Yeah,
I
you
don't know.
should. Yeah. Yeah, you should. Yeah. Yeah, it's getting very popular. I mean, a lot of people we know listen to audiobooks more than they read now. So I think that,
I find that a little bit disturbing. I find many students are registering for my courses and they ask me very simple questions. And I say, well, all that information's on the website. And they say, oh, I don't read anymore. And I'm like, what? You don't read anymore? You mean you don't know how to read? No, I just don't read anymore. If it's not in a 2-minute sound bite, I can't be bothered. And I'm like, wow, is this the new generation? Now, see, this is where Steiner talked about autonomic forces holding human consciousness to machines, which means degrading. We are devolving spiritually. And in a sense, the HAL 9000 computer is taking over. If you're familiar with that story. The HAL 9000 computer, 2001 Space Odyssey. It's where our own machines actually decide we're irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so, Steiner warned about this 100 years ago. And here I look around every day and everybody's doing this. They're just on their phones. They're unaware of anything around them, let alone spiritual realities. And so this is actually contracting consciousness around a limited machine and holding it there so that a person cannot touch even normal reality, let alone spiritual realities.
But what about the aramonic potential for a wider connection? Like it's contracting, but it's also connected globally, and it's also with this new AI. I mean, you're talking to these computers like they're people. I mean, it almost feels like a sentient power in there.
I don't do that, but some people do.
Well, but I mean, yeah, we do, and it's going to be done more often. I mean, it's getting to the point where you don't search things online anymore. You go to your AI assistant, and they give you like a summary of any question that you have. Right? It's very much like, to me, it's almost like there could be room for some spiritual takeover there in a way. because
Well,
the infrastructure is built, and maybe like build it and they will come type thing, you know. Aramon will come.
I I see that the AI has usefulness, just like calculators do. Who wants to do the old-fashioned calculation, right? You got a calculator, but uh, no matter how many times you push buttons on a calculator, it's never going to come up with a new idea. It can't. It can't think outside the box. So AI, no matter how sophisticated it is, it's still just a plagiarism program. That's all it is. It's just plagiarizing what human beings came up with in the past. And they're synthesizing it perhaps in a novel way. But to me, there's no consciousness there.
And
And
it can be
so
accessed by a consciousness or an Aramonic sort of energy.
I would say it is Ahrimanic
Right,
in
right,
its
right. Yeah, yeah.
that doesn't mean it can't be used as a tool. I mean, think about it. Without tractors, 99% of the world would be out in the fields toiling 14 hours a day. And so, we don't need to demonize a tractor and say, oh, tractors are evil. Tractors are going to take over the world. Tractors have saved us all from backbreaking labor in the fields so that we can devote time to other things. So if AI can be sort of kept in perspective, and that it is a tool and not a master, then AI is fine if people can keep that in mind. But I mean, look at the kids today; they're just being programmed by this stuff, and their souls are just almost being absorbed into this little tiny machine. And they're unaware of anything around them, and their social skills are terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. It's very noticeable and scary, and scary. Darren, do you have any questions?
It's just the next generation, man. It's
Uh,
just how it's gonna go. I'm sure, it does seem worse, but the AI is a. I mean, I don't know about talking to, but it just makes us all, I guess, a little more capable if we're paying attention. Maybe you can get a little more done, but it can't be. You can't miss. I don't think it's going to get much farther than it is right now. I think it's sort of. It's almost reached its potential, other than mimicking it. Like, I think plagiarism's a good word for it, because even when it's not plagiarizing, they have the new ones. They might be able to redo things and do research, but it's still just regurgitating stuff we've already done. They've got other ones that you can turn on and do a bunch of repetitive motions on your computer, and it'll copy all that. It'll copy. You can have it sort of redo this things for repetitive motions, but it does kind of boil down to plagiarism at the end of the day, I suppose. What you've been sort of over, and it sounds like you've been over in East Asia for a long time. Do you come back over to this side quite often, or do you find the it's a little slower living over there? What's the allure? Is it just the teaching aspect?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because I'm director for Asia for the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. So I teach in 7 different Asian countries. So it's almost impossible to answer the question. Right now, I'm so busy, I don't come to the West very often, but I do go to Europe every now and then to do some research in alchemy because that's where the old books are found. Um, but mostly, I mean, the alchemical tradition, as far as I can tell, is gone. It could be that the Rosicrucians and other secret societies have kept back some of these practices. Um, I know that some are displeased. Some of this is coming out because it's waking people up, and their privileged positions are in danger. But others are saying, "Hey, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is compassion. This is ethics. We're all in this together." And so every human being has the right to wake up in the matrix, wake up from the matrix. But see, the archons, I mean, the lords of the world, the ones who understand the matrix and how this all works, they like their position of power. So they like it that people are cattle and half asleep because they're easily manipulated. And so they don't like these kind of techniques that I write about in my book that are waking people up. But they are also admitting that the time is changing. We're in the Dwapara Yuga now. Things are actually improving. even though they don't always look like it. I think that things will get better. There will be a golden age. Might take us a century and a half to get there, but that's nothing in the long run. That's just an incarnation or two away. So it's not really not far away. Okay. Life is like the blink of an eye. Same thing with an incarnation.
Have you been to any of the real alchemy? Not real, I don't mean it like that. I mean physical alchemy, because Prague has that
Yeah.
alchemical history. There was a conference there recently last fall that seemed super fascinating.
Mm. There is a resurgence of study in alchemy. That Carl Jung really actually kickstarted a lot of that because he was connecting it to psychology and to spirituality. He wasn't so much concerned with metallurgical or chemical alchemy. Certainly, it's there. The Chinese alchemy, there's a lot of obsession with living longer. But it's not living longer just to live longer. It's living longer so that we have more time to complete the wet way, which means we have more time to gain enlightenment if we live longer. I mean, Tibetans and Indians will often say it takes many lifetimes to reach enlightenment. I mean, the Buddha was not enlightened in one lifetime. He did, hundreds of lifetimes before of spiritual work to build up to that moment. He sat under the tree and dropped the story of himself. So things are not in isolation, even though they appear to be. There's a long string of trajectory going back through time.
But I think alchemy has a real importance for energy, for physics, because I think it's not just about metals and stuff, but it's about molecules and
Yes.
like they don't want to call it alchemy; they'll call it something else, like cold fusion or whatever. But it's alchemy.
Well, it's part of the structure of the matrix. We are in a dream densified dream. But any physicist can tell you that this is all consciousness.
Yeah.
There's actual physical reality here. It appears to be physical reality, but all physical reality is made of these building blocks that don't actually exist. Because when you get down to the atomic level and the subatomic level, all of a sudden you just get that there's just a wavering, there's just a vibration, there's nothing physical there, the smaller you go. And what that is wavering mind. So this is the mind of the Godhead. Thought becomes light, light condenses to matter, and then matter we believe is real. And so we believe things are solid. But if you know how the matrix works, then miracles of healing, miracles are easy. Walking across the swimming pool, bending spoons and forks without touching them, healing people with simply a thought. This is all discussed in the book.
Darren, do you have any more questions, or do you want me to keep going?
Well, I'm wondering is there you mentioned a resurgence. Does that do you get a lot of people traveling over there to learn these sorts of things? Are you worried? You mentioned you wrote the book because you feel like, you don't want that to go away or not to be told, but that's just sort of your personal story. But on whole, where's the practice at? Is it fading out? Is that getting a resurgence? Are you worried about it in 100 years or in 200 years or in 300 years?
Come and go, and it was one of the reasons why I wanted to make a record of this, because most of the academics that I know who study alchemy, they've never been initiated. They actually do not know the practices from the inside. And so they're stumbling, they're blind. Yes, they're wonderful academics and they've done their research and they've got PhDs and they've got libraries of stuff behind them. But if you've never been initiated, you can't possibly know what true spiritual alchemy is. And so, in a sense, I'm a rare bird because I was initiated in the Kundalini yogas of the Tibetans, and I was initiated into sixth Kriya as well, Kriya yoga. And so I can't give those practices directly. You have to get them from a Kriya yoga lineage holder. But I wrote about them and I related them to. So that knowledge existed in Egypt, in the Arab world, and in Europe at one time. I suspect it was lost. And that's why I have beautiful books about alchemy, but the poor scholars, they have not been initiated. They simply do not know. But, it's not arrogance. I'm not looking down my nose, but I mean, how can you know the code if you've never been initiated in the code? So they're blind. It's unfortunate, but I hope my book will revive actual practices.
Is this is some of your work involved in the Tibetan Book of the Dead and getting through the Bardo and like what happens after you die? Like, is there a practice that you need to, teach or work on yourself that kind of gets you through to the next one where you don't,
Oh, yes,
isn't the goal to not come back?
I'll be teaching this next week.
Oh,
Yeah, I teach it all the time. I just taught it in Cambodia at Angkor Wat just last month. So this is a 2-day course called Dying and Beyond. We used to call it Death, Dying and Beyond, but we changed the course title to Shamanism, Dying and Beyond. This is where we explore the afterlife and where we begin to learn to navigate the afterlife. So once we learn how to navigate the afterlife, that is what the Bardo is. Bardo Tadol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Bardo means between two. Bardo. So between death and rebirth. And once we learn what the processes of what's going on between death and rebirth, then we can start saying, oh, I'm going to make different choices in my different incarnations because I feel like I want to move to a higher level school and I don't want to stay here in kindergarten on earth forever. Or if I do come back here, then I'm going to come back here out of compassion, which is what the saints do. They come back here because they know it's tough here and they want to help us. So they take incarnation here. But shamans are able to actually contact help outside of the matrix. So to use to use matrix terminology, shamans can go talk to Trinity and Morpheus outside of the matrix at any time because they know how to shamanically journey. But this, how to shamanically journey has been suppressed, desperately suppressed, but it's coming back with a vengeance. Because I'm teaching hundreds of students and thousands of students are being taught in my co-harness courses around the world how to get out of the matrix.
how do people find that? Do they go to shamanism-asia.com or?
That's I'm director for Asia, so that's Foundation for Shamanic Studies Asia, but there's also FSS, Foundation for Shamanic Studies America, FSS Europa, FSS Latin American in Spanish. It's all over the world. So if you want to come study in Asia, you can go to shamanism-asia.com. If you want to study in America, it's shamanism.org. And Europe is, well, you got to look it up, FSS Europa. I think it's EU.en.
Okay.
EU.en, I believe. But you
Okay.
can look.
Yeah, people can find that. Do you think the Book of the Dead has stood the test of time? Like, do you think it's pretty accurate?
Well, there's a chapter on that in the book as well. So that'll go into much more detail on that. I would say it is very relevant. The problem is that it's a bit culture bound for the time, but I would say it's one of the most shamanic aspects, and it comes directly from India. It comes from Padmasambhava, who was Indian, not Tibetan. So when we say Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's actually the Indian Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Indo-Tibetan would be better. It's just that it went into Tibet and survived, whereas in India went through many, many shifts, and the Mughals came in and kind of destroyed everything. So fortunately, Islam did not reach Nepal or Tibet, and so there wasn't all that destruction.
What about Egypt as far as shamanism goes and the afterlife, their focus on the afterlife and the NDEs and I guess to kind of actually I'll leave it at that because I've got another question that'll just confuse everything. So yeah, about Egypt, is it very similar? Is there any crossover or is that a completely different sort of philosophy?
I would say the Egyptians were shamans extraordinaire. And in the Egyptian Book of the Dead is another version of how to navigate the afterlife. And that's one of the reasons why they painted it on the inside of the king's tombs, so that the king would be able to navigate. But presumably they would have had that knowledge long before. So usually by the time they have to paint it out is the time that the knowledge actually was beginning to be lost. So Egypt is very interesting in the sense that they started out extremely highly developed out of nowhere and then actually degraded. Um, and so this would lead one to think that Egypt is probably a legacy of an earlier civilization that was highly developed. And then people, in a sense, lost it. As
Yeah.
the Kali Yuga came in, their consciousness levels dipped down, and they couldn't even remember how to navigate the afterlife anymore, and eventually even lost the knowledge of why the pyramids were built. Which, to an initiate, it's absolutely obvious why they were built. They were initiation chambers. There's nobody buried in the Great Pyramid. There never was. The academics are lost. They're just lost. They have no idea what Egyptian spirituality actually is. But if they practice shamanism or other esoteric practices, they can begin to learn. It'll change. We're still in the dark ages.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. No, we totally agree with the whole Egypt thing. I mean, it's obvious physically there as well. And even the Book of the Dead, one of the earliest writings, talks about them finding thousands and thousands of articles and vases and all kinds of stuff from earlier. So there's
Yes.
definitely even, evidence of them finding this stuff.
Hmm.
So how would that initiation chamber work then in the Great Pyramid? I mean, can you
Well,
can you expand on
oh,
that a little bit? Is that like a sit in there with resonance and go out of body? You're harnessing the power of the pyramid type thing?
yeah, it's going to be in part two of Secret Fire. But essentially, if you have the opportunity to actually lay in the initiation chamber in what they call the king's room, the king's chamber. There's no king ever buried in there. There's absolutely no evidence there was ever anyone buried there. And it was certainly not built by a single king to be buried there because it took centuries to build. And so, but if you have the opportunity to lay in that uh, and go into certain states of consciousness, you will receive an initiation. And so I was lucky. I was in Egypt on 9/11, 2001.
Wow.
And I was actually I was on a boat going down the Nile, and I saw over the sky, just like this subspace disturbance, Captain, to use Star Trek terminology, going over like a gray wave coming from the northwest, coming from Europe. And I think it was just the news of 9/11 was just affecting human consciousness like a wave, and from, of course, New York to Europe and down to Egypt. And I thought, well, what is that? I just felt this depression. And it was like, oh, there's a disturbance in the force. I didn't know what it was. I went out into the front of the boat and I was just meditating. And I thought, something has changed.
Wow.
Something is in the air. I don't know what it is. The next day, the boat stopped at a little village. An Egyptian man came out with a newspaper and he was shouting in Egyptian Arabic and pointing to this little tiny photo in the Arabic newspaper that showed two towers and a mosquito nearby. And I thought, oh, it looks like a little plane hit the towers in New York. I thought, oh, well, I got back on the boat. 2 days later, we arrived back to civilization and, of course, learned the news. So I thought, okay, Bush might bomb the entire Middle East, so I think I'll get out of here. But I had to wait a few days to get my flight back to Vienna. So I thought, I'm going to go back to the Great Pyramid, and I'm not going to leave the so-called King's Chamber until I know why that was built. So I went back because I had been there before and it was packed with tourists, and just packed. And nobody seemed to really be appreciating it. They were all just complaining about the food in the hotel and wow, 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 wow. And I was sort of disappointed. So this time I went back and it was the same thing, packed with tourists. Everybody's whining about the ketchup and the mustard in the hotel or something. And then I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to sit down, lean against the wall and meditate. I don't care what anybody thinks. So I slid down against the wall and I just started meditating. And other people started to see me and they started to slide down against the walls as well. And one by one, the whole room, people who wanted to meditate all slid down against the wall and were silent. And the other people got spooked and they said, let's get out of here. This is creepy. And so they all left. And so then there's just this, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people around the walls all meditating. And I'm kind of keeping one eye open, kind of looking around, going, oh, this is good. And so then when people would come up through the, what's it called, the galley or something, they would come into the room and they would see all these just stone Buddhas sitting around, you know, in silence, and they got silent, and then they'd stay only for a short time and they'd leave. So I kept sitting there and I kept sitting there, and I made a commitment that I'm not leaving this room until I know why this was built. And one by one, everybody left. And so then I'm sitting there alone for a long time. Now, inside the pyramid, you can't tell whether it's day or night. I mean, you have thousands of tons of stone on top of you. There's no windows. So I'm sitting there, a couple hours go by, and I'm still sitting there meditating alone. And I thought, oh man, they must have locked the door. I guess I'm in here for the night. And then a guard came and he poked me, and I looked up, and then he said something in Arabic, and he pointed to the so-called sarcophagus, which is not a sarcophagus, but it's an initiation chamber. And I said, oh, me? I can get in? He said, yeah, get in. In Arabic, I assume that's what he was saying. So I actually got it, and I laid down, and I thought, okay, well, what do I do now? You know, do I do something like this? So I tried different meditations as I'm laying there. And then briefly later, an Egyptian guy astrally appears, and he says, are you ready to go? And I said, yeah. And we just took off. And suddenly I was about 5 miles up in the air looking down on the pyramid. And the pyramid was like, have you ever seen those fountains that have the ball on top? You know, they're supporting a ball that's floating in midair, when the fountain is keeping it up. Well, I was floating like this, maybe 5 miles in the air over the pyramid, and I felt there was just a force holding me up. And then the guy appeared again, the Egyptian guy, not physically, of course, this is non-physical. And he said, are you ready to go? And I said, okay. And we took off out of the solar system at light speed, went to a particular star system, and I heard this singing, oh, and it was vibrational singing. It wasn't a chorus like normal, and it was welcome home.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And so anyway, a lot of things happened. That'll be in the next book. And then I came back, and the guard was poking me again.
Wow.
It's time to go. And when I came out, it was all, the sun had set, and there was just a little orange light. And I thought, now I know why they built.
That is crazy. I mean, I've got questions like, what star system? Was it Orion or anything by any chance? Or
that will be revealed in the second.
yeah. Well, what did the Egyptian character look like? One of the gods, or?
It was classic. I mean, he had the pretty Semitic nose, you know, and a kind of a dhoti, no shirt on. Pretty much looked like a regular guy. So he didn't look like a god or something. I think he was just one of the Egyptian initiates who probably picked people up who knew what to do, who knew to lay, who were ready to go.
That's great. Darren, is that not crazy that two of our recent guests have had, actually it might have been last week's episode that came out. Now I have to figure out what John Stewart Reed. He invented the cymoscope, but he ended up in there during lunchtime when nobody was there. Similar story to you. It was during the day when there's usually people all over the place, and he ended up by coincidence on his own in the king's chamber, and he got healed in the king's chamber. And it's the same thing with you. Like, you've had this, you know, well, you decided to do it, you intended to do it, to figure that out, not necessarily on your own, but the circumstances, you know, prevailed, and you ended up in there all on your own, and you both had these amazing experiences that have, you know, obviously led you through an amazing journey over the last 20 something years.
Yeah. Well, that happened all after this book. So this book is prior to
right.
that.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, that gives us a couple things to try the next time we're in the Great Pyramid. I mean, I got to go back just to try new stuff there now. I mean, we were lucky enough to get to do that, sort of that same thing. We got to lie in the box, and then we had our our buddy there, Yusuf, did the like resonance with me, did some tones in there while we were lying in the box, but it was a very meditative state. It was pretty cool. It's
I think it was only 2 or 3 minutes each, right? It was pretty quick.
yeah, we got about 3 minutes each or something like that. So, but you know, you could probably figure out getting a little extra time, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know how long I was in there. I have no sense for time
We
at
might
all.
only been in there 3 minutes. You know, maybe that's just because you just got to be ready. You got to know what you're going in there for. Be like, all right, we got to go in there, find the Egyptian guy, get the fuck out of here, get the gold, then we're out of here.
Get the goose that lays the golden egg and come back.
That's right. Before the giant wakes up. Kevin, this has been fantastic. We appreciate you going across the pond over from Japan and to sunny Alberta. I bet you. Are you on the west coast or the west side or the east side? I don't know where it is.
Well, I'm near the lake in the center of the western part of Japan right now, but I'll be in Bali in a few days.
So I think that's decent weather on the west side of Japan, right? Is that the good side or the bad side?
Foolish, but the cherry blossoms are just falling off now. So I'm still wearing a sweater. It's quite cold. But no snow.
No snow. We just crawled out of winter here, so we're the sun's shining. We're having a good time. We appreciate you doing this in the morning. It's always a pain to do it in the first thing in the morning before you start your day. Yeah, show us the book. Tell us where we can find them all too.
You can buy any bookseller in the world has these, and there is also French translation of the book on Mongolian shamanism. There will be a French translation of The Secret Fire of Alchemy as well coming up. Any bookseller, they're from Inner Traditions. This is from North Atlantic Books. This is from Inner Traditions.
What's that one there? Oh, that's the Mongolia one in your other hand, right?
Yeah. And so 2 different topics completely. But the book I'm working on now will be part 2 to this. So Secret Fire part 2.
You should come back on when that one comes out.
Sure. Or I'll come back. You guys read the book.
Yeah, and I'll listen to it when you do the audio.
You'll have
audio book.
A lot more questions. Yeah.
I read for my job every day, so it's hard to fit in extra reading. I love being able to listen to something. So
plus they didn't send us the book in. So.
Maybe you guys can give Inner Traditions the hint that I should. Kevin has a nice voice, and he should do this.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
They owe us one. We just did an audiobook for him for free. So
there you go. Yeah.
Well, Kevin, this has been great. So, do you have a website? Do you have social media? Is there any place people can follow you, track you down, annoy you?
www.shamanism-asia.com. shamanism-asia.com. Everything is there. You can find out about me, about my courses, about my books, about my papers, about my interviews, and I'll be posting this interview there too as soon as it goes up.
Do you do online courses too, or just like physical?
I did during the pandemic, basically to keep everybody sort of, progressing through the pandemic. But after the pandemic, I returned to in-person only because I believe they're more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Well, Kevin, this has been great. We appreciate it. And we will get the book eventually. It will show up here in time.
You guys haven't got it yet. I'm amazed. I thought North Americans would have it first. It's only coming from.
We're in Canada, so
we're in Canada, so
not that far away.
We got to get over the new Iron Curtain, Iron Curtain between Canada.
They were published 4 months ago, so
then it's got to get across provinces. That can be.
Well, plus not only that, they tend to send them out to us in batches. So I'll get like 10 books at a time, and then 10 more and then 10 more. So,
well, I'll let them know that you never got the book.
Yeah. Tell them, give them shit. You tell them what the hell. But I look forward to doing this again. And like you say, you're going to do another one. So we'll have you on again. And this has been great. If you find yourself in the Western Hemisphere again, let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Take care.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
And that was a chat with Kevin B. Turner all the way from sunny Japan. What'd you think?
Oh, that was fantastic. Yeah, that was fun.
I guess it's not always sunny. I mean, that's what is always. I wonder if Corbett's still over in Japan. We should have him on again.
Yeah, we should.
But yeah, big thanks to Kevin for coming on the show. We encourage everyone to go out and get the book. Check it out. Big thanks to him for getting up early, coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you choose to support us over at grimerica.ca/support. We can't do it without you. And we are 100% listener supported. So grimerica.ca/support. If you can, when you can, keep us going, keep us on the air. Contact at thecabin.com for trips and events. There's like 5 spots left for Bonneville next month if people want to come hang out with Ronald Carlson. And we got Azores and Easter Island coming up in the next, all within a year. So we got some great trips coming up. Adultbrain.ca for audiobooks and ebooks and everything else. And what else we got? GrimAmericaCBD.com for all that fun stuff, all that great stuff. I mean, check out our Adult Brain audiobook YouTube channel. Give us a like and subscribe. If you're Canadian, check out the alist.ca and GrimAmericaOutlaw.ca for our other crazy podcasts. You know, the stuff that we can't talk about here and we can't put on YouTube. And we didn't put here. It's a little more controversial usually and just that sort of thing. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. Oh, yeah. If you want to go to Cosmic Summit, use Grimerica 25 and we will see you there. Other than that, we love you. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.